Hello and welcome back to part 3 of our Creating a Linux Distro series. In this video, we're going to be adding a theme to Grub, and we're going to fix that kernel issue we had from yesterday. The first thing I did was I switched out my kernel configuration. So this is the kernel configuration file, and we're going to look and see how this differs from a normal Pop! OS file. So on the left, we have the default Pop! OS configuration. So this is what I copied from my boot folder. And over here, we have a few changes. So the first is this configure kernel gzip. And I think this is why it wasn't working in the last video. There's a few more things that need to be changed. And some of these will help in the future when we add on video. So that configure HID, I think that's keyboard or some kind of input device support. There's some certificates, some font related stuff. So these settings are going to need to be set to yes. And then there's some certificates. This config system trusted keys, it will say something like this, and then these just need to be empty. So all these options up here, a lot of them are M's. And what we did is we switched some of these M's to yeses. So anything that's an M is still going to be compiled. However, it's not going to be actually compiled into the kernel. It's going to need to be loaded. The easiest option is just to set them to yes, and then they'll be available as soon as we boot up our ISO. That's the first thing, and this fixes the issue where the kernel would get halfway through and then stop loading. So that's one thing. And apart from that, there's also a bug in the build kernel script. So as you can see on the left, there's the old file. On the right, there's the new file. So I added in these 3 lines. One is to copy in this config. So it'll make the default config, and then it'll copy over that with this config that we got from Pop! OS. And I also was building this in the wrong directory. This was getting built and unzipped inside of who knows where. And now it's being put in the right spot. Okay, so that's build kernel. One thing that is useful is I was looking for this config file, so I went in, so I wanted to change and look for these settings. Like I wanted to look for config kernel gzip, and it's in this inputs file. However, it's not actually in our compile kernel folder. So what you can do is you can do rep-r and we're in the wrong folder. So this will go through and this will look through every file in this folder, and it will find all the instances of this which weren't in our Visual Studio find. So somewhere in here there's going to be a .config. Okay, I don't see it. However, right inside this compile kernel, there's a .config file which has this setting. And then that's the file that needs to be edited. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to add a Grub theme. There's a ton of different themes. I like the Tela theme a lot, so we're going to use this one. And we're going to clone this GitHub, and then we're going to set up the theme from there. I added in a script to do this, and what it does is it makes a new folder, Grub theme. It CDs into it, clones the repository, makes an output folder, and then the repository, the GitHub repository, had instructions, and they said, run this command, and it will output the theme. So that generates the theme, and then we can make a folder which will hold the theme inside our ISO, and we can copy all of our contents from this folder into that. So if we go ls and we can see that our ISO has all of this copied onto it. Once you have the theme, you also have to tell Grub to use it. So we were using this Grub config that we just copy and pasted in. However, normally you don't manually edit this Grub config file. So let me close out of this. So we can run make grub config or grub make config, and normally, and what I wanted to do is use the grub in this compile grub in order to make our grub config. That wasn't working, so I ended up using the pre-installed one on my computer. So this is just the one that's installed on my operating system and not the one we just built. So we're going to have an output, and we're going to have an output right here. And this is going to take in a file from /etc default grub. So inside of our etc default folder, we've got this grub file, and I've set the grub theme to be a path to the theme.txt. So inside of here, we've got our grub theme output and the theme.txt. So it needs to go there. And then once we run this make config, it will generate this file for us. So we're going to do that. There's a few things it does which don't work very well. And the first one is it's pointing to this file right here, and it's referencing all of these, and we don't want to do this. So we're going to use a command to replace this automatically. So each time we run the script, these will all get replaced. So we'll copy this, and we'll run sed. So the way sed works is you type in sed-i, which will replace the file in place. And then you can type in an input string and an output string. So for example, we could type in, and I think we need R. Let me check real quick. Oh, S. So we could go S and then / load font, load font 2. And we'll pass in grub config. And that replaces all of our load fonts with load font 2. So we're going to take this and we're going to replace it with where it's going to be on our ISO, which is going to be inside of that grub themes folder, and then /tella. So you can't use these forward slashes in sed because the sed uses these slashes to separate. So if we had something like load /font we wanted to replace, then we would need to do, if we did load /font, it would break. But if we put a backslash, it'll treat this as a regular slash. So that's called like an escape character, and it will treat this as a normal character instead of a splitter. And it's done that replace. So anytime we want to replace a forward slash, we need to escape it with a backslash character. And there's a few other characters that need to be replaced. So I literally just took this in, I added backslashes in front of all of these, and then as you can see, all the way from here to here is this with the backslashes, and then we do the same thing for the output, and it's going to go to /boot /grub /themes. So let's run this. And that does the replacement. And the other thing we're going to do is we're going to delete a few different lines. So we're going to delete line 177, which is a submenu, all the way to 259. So we only want this one menu entry here, and all the other menu entries we can delete. And then we can copy our grub config on. So one thing when you're working a lot with these is you want to use the sync command. So if you run sync, it will continue writing to the ISO, and it'll prevent anything from being cached, because sometimes when you run QEMU, it's not going to actually have those fully written to the ISO, and it will break. So let's do a copy real quick. Okay, so we've opened up our grub and we have an issue. So we're going to close out of this and let's manually inspect this grub config file that we've copied on. And let's look and see all of our fonts are correct. So let's run it again and see if anything's changed. And we literally just restarted it and it works now. So even with sync, maybe I didn't run sync, you can run into these issues where it just takes time for everything to be written and it's going to be out of date. Now, if we press enter, it's actually going to fail because it can't find /boot/VM Linux. So if we go to our menu entry, our Linux and our init ramfs are going to need to be updated because these are the wrong paths to them. So let's do that. Let's copy over. So we've loaded up and we'll run and see if it works now. So we have grub search file system no device. So let's look for that. And one interesting thing, all of this I'm not sure is really necessary. I think this search isn't needed, so we're going to remove this. And I believe we can get rid of this. Let's just copy this for our menu entry. So there's a few reasons why people might not want to use the Grub theming. One of them is people are going to have different displays. So different Grub themes are going to render differently on different displays. So you need to be careful and make sure that they're actually rendering correctly. So another thing is people may not want to... Oh, okay. So our Linux is loading. However, I believe we have the wrong font. So or our resolution is weird. So I'm going to go ahead and see if I can fix that, and we'll be right back. Okay, so it looks like it might be automatically setting our GFX mode. So we're going to update this manually, and you could go in the script and do that. And we're going to recopy it. And I don't know if this load font is actually getting called. I think it's not. I think it's erroring out. So let's try a different font. So we're just going to do font equals actually, let's try getting rid of this and see what happens. We can start out with font equals Unicode like it was before. And we'll test this. Oh, wow. Okay, so I think that fixed it. I think it was erroring out because of that load font, and it wasn't running the rest of this code. As you can see, it's now run our entire script. And this is actually even just a little bit too big because the resolution is so high. So I can't even see the bottom of it. So if I press enter, we can get to the end and see welcome to my Linux. So if we undo this all, oh, okay, well, now we've really undone everything. So the changes we made to this are getting rid of these, and this font was not loading, and because it wasn't loading, nothing after it ran. So we copied this out, and then we put this as /drive, etc. Anyways, so Grub themes can be a bit of an issue, but we've got the script set up for working on our theme, and if you're having any issues, this should be in the documentation. So thank you so much for watching, and in the next video, we're going to go over some different package managers, how they work, and then we're going to use one of those package managers and use that as our starting point. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. Take care.